Welcome back to the Adam Schefter podcast as we get ready for the release of the NFL schedule, a milestone moment in which people begin to plan their schedules for 2027, book hotel rooms, decide which trips they want to take, see where they want to see their favorite teams play. It's always a momentous occasion. Also really gets you started on thinking about the 2025 season, and the NFL will release its schedule on ESPN Wednesday night, 8 o'clock. Of course, there'll be little announcements before then. Some of the matchups will trickle out before then, but the full schedule will come out 8 p.m. Wednesday night on ESPN, and we'll be back in this spot later this week, Thursday, with another special post-schedule review podcast looking at the schedules of all 32 NFL teams and what stands out about it this upcoming Thursday. But today, we are joined by the co-host of the Pat McAfee Show, my friend, my colleague, Ty Schmit, the co-host of the weekly Six Pack.
Thank you very much, Schefty. Good to be back, as always, after a week off. You mentioned it. Listen, I love the draft. I love a lot of the stuff we do in the offseason to kind of get us more excited and pass the time until we actually have meaningful football to talk about. But as I've gotten older, listen, we know the opponents already, but figuring out exactly how the schedule falls and, like you said, kind of being like, oh, this game will be a Sunday night football game, I think, or this is going to be the part of the season where, you know, the rubber is going to meet the road. All that kind of stuff I absolutely love. So I agree. I'm in the same boat as you. I cannot wait for the schedule release.
You know, when I used to cover the Denver Broncos, they used to make the schedule announcement in mid to late April, and it essentially would be a situation where it would be a little agate in the newspaper. Maybe there would be a little story about the Denver Broncos schedule, but there's so much interest in this now, and everybody is so focused on who their team is playing. And we know all the opponents. We know who your favorite team is playing, and yet it lays out a certain kind of way. It's always really interesting to see how it plays out. We've got some incredible matchups this year, right? The Chiefs and the Bills play each other this year. The Lions and the Eagles play each other this year. The Rams and the Ravens, the Eagles and the Chiefs. We've got a Super Bowl rematch. How about a Bengals and Bills matchup? How about the Commanders versus the Chicago Bears? And we know what happened last year when those two teams played. That was the Hail Mary that took over those two teams' seasons and really dictated where it went from there. Vikings play the Seahawks. Sam Darnold going up against his former team. We got the Steelers and the Packers, which is a great matchup. And I think what has also enhanced the schedule release is the way that these social media teams have conducted themselves. This is for them, their Super Bowl. They're planning this all off season, waiting for schedule release day. And some of the great ones like the Chargers have gotten attention. The Broncos have gotten attention. The Panthers have gotten attention. Everybody's social media department is trying to outdo the other, which has enhanced the whole experience, which has made the release of the schedule that much bigger. We already know the opening night game. And to me, that's the way I also frame this. It's Cowboys-Eagles. And so now we've got months to dissect the first matchup of the season. Cowboys-Eagles, NFC East showdown. The last time the Eagles hosted the Cowboys in week 1 was in 1970 when the Eagles still were playing at Franklin Field 55 years ago. It was Norm Snead versus Roger Staubach. It was the Eagles' last year at Franklin Field. And now for the first time in 55 years, now that they're at the Link, the Eagles and Cowboys are opening back up again in the season opener, prime time, Thursday night, September 4th. By the way, an early start to the season, September 4th. Here we go. Whoa, baby. But now, weeks of Cowboys-Eagles buildup leading into all those matchups we talked about, and we'll know it all Wednesday night with the announcement on ESPN.
Yeah, I mean, not that they would need it anyway, but I'm incredibly excited to see what the number for that opening night game ends up being.
Oh.
Every year we seem to surpass, because we get an unbelievable matchup, but them being able to put the Cowboys against the Eagles, and have a divisional game that early too, like that's going to be awesome. Like you said, Schefty. I mean, we already know all the games, but it really does. It just, seeing where your division games fall and like looking, we always go by win percentages of, oh, hey, we have the 28th most favorable schedule this year, but then you get the schedule release and it's finalized and it's like, oh, wow, but we have a 5-game stretch here that's incredibly tough that could make or break the season. So a lot to look forward to there. We'll obviously, keep our eyes on that and probably be talking about quite a bit of that on Thursday. Let's move on to topic number 2 and go away from the schedule release. I don't know if this was breaking news. I'll be honest, this kind of caught me by surprise. I guess I knew it was a possibility, but what do you make of the Saints QB room, their situation now that Derek Carr, I don't want to say abruptly retired, but retired, due to that shoulder injury? Did you see that coming?
Well, I don't think they were counting on him. And I think this worked out about as well as it could work out for the New Orleans Saints, considering a couple of factors. Number one, Derek Carr collects the $10 million signing bonus that he got for redoing his contract in February, I believe it was. Maybe it was March, this offseason. And he now forfeits the $30 million, which was generous on his part, forfeiting the $30 million, giving that back to the New Orleans Saints, and them not having to count that against their salary cap. The Saints go out and get Tyler Shuck in the second round of the draft in April. So now the Saints go into this season right now with Tyler Shuck, Spencer Rattler, and Jake Haener. And the new head coach, Kellen Moore, already has said it's a 3-way competition for the starting job. So let's just assume for a moment that Tyler Shuck wins the job or doesn't win the job. Whoever plays quarterback this year for the Saints, either that quarterback is going to have the chance to really impress them and say, we don't need a quarterback of the future, or they're going to be bad enough in all probability that they're going to be right back in the quarterback market in the 2026 NFL draft, where the quarterback selection is supposed to be a lot better than it was this past year. So to me, the way that I look at it, as it's almost a no-lose case for the Saints. Either their quarterback steps up now and they find out they have a guy, or he doesn't, and they're going to go then find one in the 2026 NFL draft. It's not the case and situation that you want to have ideally, but I think it actually worked out as well as it could have right now with Derek Carr retiring. Like, he could have opted to have the surgery. He would have got on IR. They would have owed him $40 million. It would have been another cap charge of $30 million for a team that's already strapped against the cap. So to me, this was a victory for the Saints as much as it possibly could be.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's almost like if he would have played this year, it's kind of like delaying the inevitable, because we know he was hurt. He was going to, forego surgery, or at least that's what he wanted to do. If he does that and is still able to play, there's still a chance he gets hurt, week 4, week 5, and you're kind of back at square one. And I think everyone knows Kellen Moore has a little bit of a leash here. It's not like anyone's expecting the Saints to, win the division or win the Super Bowl or make the playoffs this year. So I kind of assumed that when they went with Tyler Shuck. It's like, even before Carr retired, it was like, oh, there's a chance that they're really bad this year, and then they're back up at the top of the draft next year. But you're right, they're kind of playing with house money this year. If Shuck's great, awesome. We found our guy, and if he's not, they're going to be, you would assume that they're going to be near the top of the draft for the draft class next year. Quarterback is 1,000 times more desirable than it was this past year. So I think that, if you're a Saints fan, that is a good way to frame it.
Now, the storyline that everybody's going to connect all year long is whether Arch Manning is going to come out and play in New Orleans. But again, we have not gotten any indication that he's going to leave school early. We don't know that the Saints are going to have a high enough pick to even get Arch Manning. But the idea of Arch Manning playing for the hometown Saints, the way his father Archie once did, after this team finally used a first or second round pick on a quarterback for the first time since it selected Archie Manning, number 2 overall in 1971. Obviously, that's a tantalizing storyline. but it's more fun to talk about than it is practically on the way to having happened. So we'll see how it plays out. But I think the Saints right now, this worked out as well as it could have for a bad situation.
I'd agree. And to the point of Arch, we do this every year. I mean, Quinn Ewers last year before the start of the season, hey, this guy's going to be a top 5 pick. He falls to the 7th round. So obviously, I don't think that's going to happen with Arch Manning or anyone with the last name Manning. But again, that's we got a lot of time, a lot of football left to be played before we, make that kind of decision or that kind of declaration. Let's move on to topic number 3, Schefty. This actually came out today in a statement released to you and ESPN. Trey Hendrickson basically said, hey, listen, there has been no communication between me, my agent, the Bengals, since the draft or before that. He came on Pat's show and said the same thing before the draft. When you take all that into account, how dire does the whole Trey Hendrickson situation seem now?
Now, look, today, it's not great. He's not happy. And again, last year, he played the good soldier, was told that if he comes back, plays well, keeps quiet, that he'd be taken care of. And we've seen other players, the 3 best pass rushers in the National Football League, the 3 players who have generated the most sacks and most pressures have been Myles Garrett, Max Crosby, and Trey Hendrickson. What's happened this offseason? Myles Garrett and Max Crosby, each with multiple years left on their deal, have been rewarded with contract extensions that made them at the time the highest paid defensive players in football. First Crosby, then Garrett with an average annual salary of over $40 million a year. Trey Hendrickson's going to the last year of his deal. So he's closer to the end of his contract than either Garrett or Crosby were. Now, yes, he's older, but still, he has done everything the way that you'd want a player to. He's exactly the type of player that you want in the locker room. And the Bengals have not had any conversations with him since the draft. They didn't even call him before, not that they needed to say, hey, Trey, FYI, we're going to draft Shamar Stewart here in the first round. Just want to give you a heads up, no bearing on how we feel about you. We love you and we want to resign. I guess they don't owe him that call, but they certainly didn't make that call either. And I don't think it's ever a bad idea to communicate with players and let them know if you're taking a player at their position in the first round of the draft, especially when there might be some strained feelings between you and that player. Why would you not take that opportunity to communicate and be upfront and go from there? So again, a situation where right now they're not talking. They didn't call him before the draft. They haven't discussed any numbers since the draft. They haven't approached him about a new deal. He's done what he was supposed to do. And I guess he still could be traded. But the fact of the matter is, most teams have spent the money that it would take to pay a guy like Trey Hendrickson. So the pool of trade candidates is smaller than it would be in mid-May than it was in mid-March because teams have allocated their funds. They've spent their money. You can't all of a sudden go shopping in May when you spent your allowance in February, March, and April. It just doesn't work like that. So Trey Hendrickson's in a tough situation. He is going to the last year of his deal. And you just like to think that both sides eventually will figure it out and find a way to get the deal done for both sides so that the Bengals can pull off what would be an amazing hat trick by signing Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Trey Hendrickson. There weren't many people, including myself, who thought when we entered the offseason that the Bengals could sign both receivers and the player who led the NFL in sacks. They're one player away from doing that, and we'll see if they can find a way to get it done. But in mid-May, they're not close right now. They're not talking right now. And you need to at least communicate before you can get back on track and have any hopes of getting done a long-term deal.
Yeah, the optics of the whole situation are just, going back to the league meetings where Katie Blackburn, whether she meant it to come out
right
the way it did or not, but she basically, said like, hey, at a certain point, a player might just need to be happy with what he's offered and, kind of meet us at a little bit. And we had Trey Hendrickson tell us on Pat's show. He said like, hey, I don't need to be the highest paid defensive player. Like, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm just looking to, get something that is, commensurate with what I've done on the field. And, like you said, obviously people are going to kind of make that connection when you draft Shamar Stewart. It's like, oh, well, is this, kind of an easier way for them to part ways with Trey Hendrickson? It's tough for me to think when right, wrong, or indifferent, however you view it, he obviously feels like he's been greatly disrespected throughout this process. So if I have a tough time thinking that he, at the end of all this, will end up taking a hometown discount or, but is that something that he might have to do? Because,
Well,
like you said, not a lot of teams have the capital to kind of maybe give him what he wants right now.
you know what, Ty? I don't even think it's a hometown discount. I think it's a case of coming up with a fair deal. I think Trey Hendrickson doesn't think he's going to be paid the same as Max Crosby and Myles Garrett. But if you come in with a number, depending on how the deal is structured, at 32, I'm making this up, which is less than two guys that he's performed as well as, if not better than by the numbers, well, that's fair. That's fair. But again, they have to at least be talking and communicating. They're not even there. I don't think he's taking a hometown discount. I think he's just looking for a fair deal. But how can you come up with a fair deal when you're not even talking? Now, again, there's time. But it's interesting because the Bengals have their rookie first-round draft pick, Shamar Stewart, not even going through the minicamp, the rookie minicamp, doesn't want to sign the injury waiver, making his own decision. We'll see how that works out. It's a very unusual step to me. You got Trey Hendrickson asking for a new fair deal. They're not talking. There's time to get it worked out. Let's see if they could do that by training camp.
Okay. Yeah. So that'll be, I mean, again, we've had our eyes on this really since, since Super Bowl week. And we haven't gotten, many answers or much movement in any direction, I guess. So yeah, we'll keep an eye on that, especially with Sam Hubbard retiring. You'd think that the Bengals, keeping him around, it seems like something, that would be paramount for their success next year, but we'll see what happens. Let's move on to topic number 4 of this week's six pack. Let's stay in the AFC North. In your opinion, what is kind of one of the more, I guess you could say, sneaky elements of the George Pickens trade for the Steelers?
Well, I think of it like this, Ty. Where is the 2026 NFL draft?
In Pittsburgh.
That's right. And guess what? The Pittsburgh Steelers right now have an enormous amount of draft capital for the 2026 draft. After this George Pickens trade, they are currently scheduled to have their first-round pick, their second-round pick, 3 third-round picks, 1 for George Pickens, a compensatory, and their own. They are scheduled to have 2 fourth-round picks, their own and a compensatory, 2 fifth-round picks, their own and a comp pick, 2 sixth, their own and a comp pick, and a 7th. So that would be, if my math is correct, 1, 2, 3, 4, 12 picks. 12 picks in the 2026 draft. I believe this past year, the Niners and Ravens each had 11, which was the most in the NFL. So the Steelers, at the very worst, are scheduled to have more picks in a draft in their city than any team in the league and any team has had in at least the last couple of years. And we also know whether or not they sign Aaron Rodgers, they're probably going to be back in the quarterback market again. So when you've got all these draft picks and you've got a great quarterback draft and the draft is in your city, all of a sudden it starts to get a little interesting to see where Pittsburgh's going to decide to allocate its draft capital, to see if it can make an aggressive push up the board to go get a quarterback, to see what the reaction in that city will be like when they're using what is now scheduled to be 12 picks, including 3 in the third round, 1 courtesy of that big trade with George Pickens. And I should say, George Pickens, like, they always felt like he was as talented as any wide receiver in the league. Somebody once said to me, they said, hey, he's the best. We just don't know if he's going to be at the stadium. That's the deal. Just couldn't count on him there. And we had George Pickens as a guest on this podcast, and I like the guy. I thought he was an impressive guy. But he also needs to recognize how important this year is to him, how much money is at stake because he's in the last year. If George Pickens balls out this year, can you imagine how much money he's going to make next year? This is the most important professional year of his life. It's not even close. There's so much at stake. You're in an offense that needs your help and services. Like, go get it done, George, for you. We want to see you make $30 million a year. It's there in front of you. Go make it happen. He has the skills and the ability to go do it, but he just needs to handle it in the most professional way possible. And let's see if he can get that done while the Pittsburgh Steelers have lined up all that draft capital.
And the opportunity's there. You know, he kind of had to be the guy in Pittsburgh. I mean, Russell Wilson, what he was, like this iteration of Dak Prescott is definitely the best quarterback he's ever played with in his career. He doesn't have to be the number one guy. CeeDee Lamb is going to, you know, afford him a lot of opportunities, I would assume. So, yeah, you hope that, I don't want to say wake up call because, you know, I mean, he everyone knows what he can do when he's on and he's playing great. But like you said, I mean, he goes out and has 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns this year. He might be making, you know, $38 million next year. So it's one of those things where hopefully a nice little reset, change of scenery, change of environment kind of, you know, helps out his career in the long run. And then I love your point about Pittsburgh loading up on all those picks because I don't think we've had that yet, have we? Where a host city has been able to move up and draft a quarterback. Like that moment would be incredible. I think that would be something that when we look at the draft moving to city, that could be right up where the, like, well, this was the coolest moment we've ever had with, you know, a home location moving up and drafting their franchise quarterback in the future. That would be incredible.
Well, think about this past year when it was in Green Bay. As soon as Mark Murphy said, and a position we haven't drafted since 2002, the fans all knew it was a wide receiver. Matthew Golden was in attendance. It was electric, and that was for a wide receiver in the 20s. Can you imagine what it would be like for a quarterback in the top 10, top 5?
They might riot.
Oh, boy, that would be off the charts to be in Pittsburgh when that quarterback is picked. Woo! That would be something else. By the way, a footnote on that George Pickens thing. I happened to be in Florida on Wednesday morning, and I had a 7 a.m. flight. And I'm on the way to the airport at about 5 a.m., and I get a text, hey, you might want to check into this. I get another text at 6 a.m. It sounds like this Pickens trade is happening. 6 a.m., and it's a situation where all of a sudden I'm trying to get this story confirmed. I'm trying to get it confirmed before we lift off with a couple of phone calls before the doors of the cabin close at like 6:45. So literally the George Pickens story came to be as the cabin door was closing and as we're about to take off from Florida. Woo, that was quite an adventure on a morning that I won't forget anytime soon there, Ty.
I mean, that's clutch. That's clutch getting that done before you lose service. Yeah, that I forgot how early that broke before I woke up that morning. So that certainly makes sense. So yeah, there's a couple different things to keep an eye out for as we move forward. Again, the Steelers drafting a quarterback next year in Pittsburgh would be, man, I need to stop thinking about that because that would be what a moment. Let's stick in the AFC North for topic number 5. A lot's been made about this. You know, a lot of different people have had, you know, comments or different thoughts on the whole situation. What do you make of Justin Tucker being released by the Ravens?
Okay, now look, if we go back and look at this, everybody just assumes logically that it has everything to do with his off the field behavior, him being accused of inappropriate behavior by 16 massage therapists from 8 different Baltimore spas and wellness centers. And all those incidents occurred between 2012 and 2016. Tucker has called the accusations unequivocally false. The league is investigating the matter. So it's obviously a very significant and serious situation that everybody's tracking. But let's just take that out of the equation for a moment. As hard as that is to do, from a football standpoint, remove that. Justin Tucker is coming off a year in where there were three kicks that essentially cost the Ravens 3 games. He had the lowest field goal percentage of his career. He is scheduled to make $4 million. So when the Ravens say it's a football decision, they can explain it away in those terms because it is, in a certain way, a football decision. They went out and drafted a rookie kicker in the 6th round from Arizona, Tyler Loop, who they liked a lot. Now, Justin Tucker may be the greatest kicker in NFL history. He's a Hall of Famer. So it may be hard to say it's a football decision, but coming off the year, you can see why the Ravens did say it was a football decision, because they are saving $4 million against the cap, because he did struggle. If we go back to last year, how many people were questioning whether they should stick with Justin Tucker when he was going through his struggles? Am I right or wrong about this?
Absolutely right. People were talking about them cutting him
all season long.
Yeah.
And then this story surfaces later in the year after his struggles, which obviously the story is very serious and significant. So that almost clinches it. Like, you could have made the decision during the season to move on from him, and they didn't. And then they had this issue, which obviously is much more serious and significant, but they drafted a rookie kicker, maybe the best rookie kicker in this draft. They signed another rookie free agent from Wyoming. They have 2 cheap, young rookie kickers. You can see why they would say it is a football decision. And you could see why everybody else would say, oh, we get it. We know it's not a football decision. But it actually, both people could be right. People could be right that they know his conduct that he's been accused of. And the Ravens could be right in saying, we've made a football decision to move on.
Yeah, you could see it both ways because, I mean, like you mentioned, he's in the argument for the greatest kicker of all time. And for the longest time, he was automatic. They sent him out there and it was, okay, boom, tack 3 on the board. Like, there's no question. He is not going to miss this. We didn't have that last year for long stretches. And a team like Baltimore, any team that is that close to winning a Super Bowl or believes like, hey, you can't, whether it's your punter or your kicker, you have to be able to rely on those guys because you're going to be in close games and at some point down the stretch in the playoffs, you're probably going to need to make a clutch kick. It's as simple as that. And he didn't do that enough. And then again, that's not even factoring in all the off the field stuff. So I think, like you said, I think you can kind of explain it either way. Do you think that he's going to get signed by someone else?
I think that people are going to have to wait. It's not going to be immediate. You're not going to see anybody sign him right away. And I think they're going to wait for the investigation to conclude. Now, if there is something that the league uncovers in that investigation, I think the teams would certainly balk at signing him. But I'll also tell you another little issue that is going to be something that people are aware of. We saw Deshaun Watson investigated, and we saw Deshaun Watson suspended for a rather lengthy period of time. Now, I don't know how the 2 cases compare, and we've heard Justin Tucker say that he didn't do anything wrong, but we've seen grounds for this behavior. We've seen the discipline involved in a case similar to this with Deshaun Watson. You would think that what transpired with him in the form of punishment would, to a certain extent, be applicable now if the league's investigation finds that Justin Tucker did anything wrong at a time they didn't. And if they do suspend him, nobody's going to sign him before. And it would be a case where he would have to be signed after a team would really need him and be in a tough situation and felt like he paid his debt to society and served his time. Now, again, there's still a lot of hypotheticals involved, but I don't think he's getting signed anytime soon.
Sure. Okay. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. Maybe, down the stretch, a playoff team loses a kicker, and maybe if we've heard more about it or whatever the case may be, I suppose that is an option, but we don't know and shouldn't be expecting to hear anything anytime soon. Let's move on to the 6th and final topic of this week's Six Pack, Schefty. Speaking of the NFL draft, Pittsburgh next year is going to be awesome. Green Bay was just awesome. What do you think of Washington getting the 2027 NFL draft? Just seeing some of the mock-ups of it on the National Mall, that looks like that could be one, for the ages as well.
Well, we knew that this was coming for quite some time. Like the league has been scoping out the mall, television networks have been scoping out the mall. We now have the president and the NFL commissioner, Roger Goodell, saying that they're expecting draft records over 1 million people. And you could just see in late April, early May, what the crowd might be like on the mall by the Washington Monument. That would be just incredible. And I just think the Commanders had a role in bringing the draft there. Has there been a franchise that has turned it around quicker and more aggressively than the Washington Commanders? Like the only analogy that I could use would be the Houston Texans when they had Deshaun Watson, traded him, wound up drafting C.J. Stroud. People are looking at the Texans as a laughing stock. And Nick Caserio comes in, D'Amico Ryans comes in, they get things straightened out. But even then, this is a different level. This Washington franchise was at a lower level for a far longer period of time. People didn't dislike this franchise. They hated this franchise. This is a franchise that was playing in the worst stadium in the National Football League with some of the worst off the field issues in the National Football League, with the worst owner in the National Football League. Every part about them was bad. Dan Snyder sells, Josh Harris, David Blitzer, and crew take over. They draft Jaden Daniels, who not only can play, but is so impressive. The guy just gets it. That's the guy you want representing your franchise. New owners, new quarterback, team starts winning. Team goes to the NFC Championship game. Team now is going to put the stadium back in the RFK site of their most historic achievements as a franchise. Incredible. And now you get the draft to go along with everything else. And Washington has turned it around, I would say, almost as much as just about any franchise in sports. Was there a franchise that was more loathed than Washington? And is there more of a place that's doing more good right now than Washington? I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but we could think about it, and it'd be hard pressed to find a place that's turned it around more than Washington.
Yeah, I can't think of anything off the top of my head either. I mean, it really is the definition of kind of, going from to sugar. It's like we had Adam Peters on the show, and it's a small thing, but it kind of encompasses everything that they've been doing. He was talking about, the NFLPA report cards that come out every year. And we looked at, the previous year when Dan Snyder was still the owner, and, treatment of families, the facilities, all that stuff. They're getting Fs and F minuses. And then you look at, the first year under the new regime, A's, and, I don't think anything worse than like a B minus. And Adam Peters basically said, this whole process, I've went to Josh and said, hey, we, like this, and this would be great. This is how we're going to compete. This is how we're going to get better. This is how we're going to win. And Josh Harris has basically just said, like, if it's something we need, just do it, just do it. And he's been very, hasn't asked a bunch of questions or needed a bunch of, ballyhoo about why they're doing it. He trusts the people that he has hired. And again, Jaden Daniels is obviously a big deal. The coach, the GM, but I think you're right. To think that they were going to turn things around like that, and then now, getting the new stadium on that site, which I would imagine Commanders fans have been pounding the drum for the last 20 years, really, since they've been playing at FedEx Field, and then the draft on top of it. I mean, it's awesome, and it's really it's a real kudos to guys like Josh Harris for, and Blitzer and like you said, the whole crew. Like it's remarkable what they've done.
And with the quarterback they have, it wouldn't surprise anybody if there were a Super Bowl in their future. I don't know whether that's this year, next year, 5 years from now, but Jaden Daniels, as long as he stays healthy, is going to give that team, that franchise, the chance to win the Super Bowl. And it'd be incredible if they could do it back on the RFK site. Woo! we're talking about stadiums that are jumping and places that are electric, like Green Bay in the draft, Pittsburgh. There wouldn't be too many things that would be more electric than Washington competing for a Super Bowl title. It'd be unbelievable to see, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. And like you said, I mean, if he stays healthy, because we saw what happened this offseason. They've become like a destination where free agents and guys they want to go play there, which has never been the case really in my lifetime or since I have, actual memories of watching football. So I all roads point up for the Commanders, which, I think like we've said before, I think the NFL is better when Washington has a team that, is going to compete for Super Bowls.
You know where else all signs point up, Ty? The
Where's
Buffalo
that?
Bills. And when the Buffalo Bills are playing well, that's also a great story. Well, after we taped our most recent podcast before this one, flew to Buffalo on a Thursday afternoon for an event that night where they had me, Stevie Johnson, and the creators, Del Reed and others of Bills Mafia. And they had us on a stage because I don't know if people are aware of the backstory, but ESPN ran a story on it in January. I had once retweeted Stevie Johnson dropped a game-winning touchdown pass against Pittsburgh. He tweeted out something like, Lord, why you do me like that? God, why you do me like that? It kind of took on a life of its own. I saw it 24 hours later. This was a year into Twitter. I was not as active and as savvy as I would be today. And I retweeted him 24 hours later, and it ignited all these Bills fans against me. So I proceeded to block every one of them, and they formed this whole Bills Mafia to be unblocked. And that was the creation of Bills Mafia. Did you know that?
I've heard you tell that story before. Yeah. It's
So they
still
had
cool though.
me and Stevie and the creators of Bills Mafia in attendance to tell each of our perspectives in this auditorium in Buffalo. And the Bills organization did an unbelievable job getting everybody together for this night. And Stevie, that was the first time that I ever met him in person. And let me just say, that guy is charismatic and dynamic. I really liked him. And if he were playing today, people forget he was a star. What I forgot was, do you realize the week before he dropped that touchdown pass against the Pittsburgh Steelers, he had 3 touchdowns and like 150 receiving yards against the Cincinnati Bengals in the game in which he pulled up his shirt and said, "Why so serious?" Do you remember that?
I do remember that. Yeah.
That was the week before he dropped the game-winning touchdown pass against. I didn't realize that. So Stevie, in today's day and age, he was ahead of his time. He would be so marketable today if he were playing with Josh Allen. Oh boy, people would love that guy because he was electric and dynamic back then. And it was a great night in Buffalo. We raised a lot of money for the Breakthrough Type 1 Diabetes Foundation. The people at Labatt's were kind enough to write a big check, raise money for the Buffalo YMCA. It was a great night for charity. It was a memorable night. And to be in the presence of all those hardcore Bills fans and Stevie Johnson and Del, it was awesome. What a great night. And we talk about teams winning Super Bowls, what it would be like. I don't know if there'd be a place that would be any cooler to be than Buffalo if the Bills ever could pull that one out. So again, when we look back at little things we did during our little off-season breaks, that was a cool one, going to Buffalo with Stevie Johnson and Bills Mafia.
Did they record anything?
Oh, yeah, we funny you asked that. Very good question. Because it started out, this was when ESPN ran the initial story. Like ESPN came to me the day before a Friday. It was like, hey, can you sit down tomorrow to tell your perspective on Bills Mafia? I'm like, sure. Like I didn't think anything of it. And they put it together. And again, I become one of the protagonists and one of the people, lightning rods here, whatever. Like to play some small part in the creation. I think Stevie dropped the pass. He tweeted it. I retweeted it. They went nuts, the fans. I blocked them. They formed together. We unblocked them. Bills Mafia born, created. We all go on. That's essentially the Cliff Notes version. ESPN runs the story. The Bills called me in January while I was at the Cardinals, Rams, or the Vikings Rams playoff game in Arizona. And we were just talking about the piece. And I said, it'd be cool if we did a night for charity with all those people involved in an auditorium talking about our various perspective, and all the money would go to charity. And like, we could do that. I'm like, yeah, after the season, of course. It's one of those things where you say, oh, yeah, you do it. And then you get a call like,
Yeah,
I just
right.
got back from Green Bay. Now I got to go to Buffalo for a night. And I got a 5:40 a.m. flight on Friday morning, which was not very good. But I went out to Buffalo and I was on the way there. And as I was on the way there, I called one of our great producers at ESPN, Greg Jewell. I'm like, you know what? You should mic me and Stevie up before and Del Reed. And if it's something, we could always tack it on as an addendum to the piece that we ran. The Bills are going to be good again.
Yeah.
So we were all mic'd up that night. The whole evening was videotaped. It happened to be very cool. I have not heard what they have thought of the video after they've seen. I think they were just getting the video today, actually, to be honest with you. But I'm curious to know what they think of it, because at some point in time, if it's worthwhile, and I'm going to guess it was, they're going to re-air some of the better parts of that on ESPN this year.
Okay, nice. Yeah, they should. They should. That's a cool story, and I'd be very interested, especially with how much time's passed, how the opinions have changed and everything. I mean, that's a big deal. Bills Mafia is, everyone knows about Bills Mafia. I would guess there are very few people that know that story. I think initially, you just hear Bills Mafia. It's like, oh yeah, it's been around since
Exactly.
the 70s or since Jim Kelly was playing there. So like, I bet there are quite a few people that have no idea that's how it started.
And it was really cool to hear everybody's perspective that night. And there were some really unique statements from Stevie and Dell. And I hope, when we get done taping this pot, I may call my producer friend Greg Jewell and say, "Did we get the tape? Did we hear it?" And I'll keep you posted on the next podcast. We'll let you know if he got it and if it's going to make the cut or it's going to hit the cutting room floor. How
It
about
sounds
that?
good.
All right. Ty, appreciate you joining today. I want to thank Ty Schmit, co-host of the Pat McAfee Show, my great producer, Dan Stanzik, Ben Smith for putting together the video, and you, the listener, for tuning into another Adam Schefter podcast. We'll be back later this week with a special edition scheduling podcast to look at the 2025 NFL schedule from the perspective of all 32 teams. That'll be later this week on Thursday. Please come back to this spot for that. Until then, have a great week, everybody. Be well and stay safe.